Air turns bitterly dry, tasting of sulfur and ozone. You feel the heat before you see it, a wave of oppressive warmth that makes your armor feel like an oven. Then the sun vanishes. A shadow, vast and terrifying, sweeps across the caldera. A creature of living myth touches down, stone shattering beneath its 6-ton weight. Smoke billows from its nostrils, and deep within its chest, a biological furnace roars to life. Let's get it going. We're talking about dragons. Welcome back to the Ecological Bestiary, the podcast where we treat the D&D monster manual like a real-world field guide. I'm your host, Kevin Madison, urban ecologist, and your dungeon master. Today we are tackling the ultimate apex predator, the dragon. To help me dissect the anatomy, ecology, and reality of these legendary beasts, I'm joined by our incredible party of experts. We have the Coastal Sentinel himself, Mike Howout.
Hello.
The Elemental Guildmaster, Rachel Arbor.
Let's go!
And our Avian Archivist, Cassie Klein.
Hello.
All right, y'all. Here we are with dragons. Let's get into the lore. Mike, and maybe with an assist from Cassie, because there is so much to cover.
Yeah, I'm bringing in Cassie on this one as well. The lore on dragons is extensive, and I think we could probably fill several episodes just talking about dragon lore in just D&D, not even everything else. But as far as lore goes with dragons in D&D. First edition, we see them pop right up right from the beginning. And kind of a little bit of like side note on this, there was actually a little bit of struggle with the Tolkien estate on this one and a couple other terminologies, which is why we see like halflings and they didn't call them hobbits. Dragons was kind of in that realm as well. So with dragons, yeah, changes between first edition to fifth edition, but relatively the same thing. We're describing a reptile-like species that has claw attack. Later versions uses the tail. We call it rend attacks. We see the breath weapon, flight, and movement. So really some of the big adjustments that we see going from 1 to 5 and beyond is that the breath attack comes into play. We see them have magical resistances and variety of colors. And in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, we have two main types of dragons. We have the metallic dragons, which are traditionally good dragons. Originally, we only had gold, but then the rest of the metallic dragons came in, and then we had the chromatic dragons, which are traditionally evil. And the strongest and most well-known of them is the red dragon, which I figured that's where we're going to be drawing a lot of inspiration probably from, is probably those types of chromatic dragons. We see them gain fame and gain lore as the game progresses. We start to see dragon deities. Bahamut and Tiamat is the more notable ones, Tiamat being the several-headed chromatic dragon. But large creatures, breath weapon, reptile-like. And as the history of the game moves on, we see different bits of information come out about them. We learn a little bit more about dragons, where in the beginning it's, here's a dragon, and this is our gameplay. People wanted more. So we see a lot of canon type of things come around. We have the more modern version of Fizban's Treasury, which is all about dragons, and it changes a little bit of the lore for 5e. Okay, but traditionally we look at the Dragonomicon, which is all about the history of dragons, which describes them in a very specific way. It describes them as warm-blooded and almost being feline-like in behavior. So that's where we really start to see the idea of dragons. We know that they are covered in scales, and a bit more on the information is they don't shed their skin, nor do they traditionally shed their scales. So that is, I think, some of the interesting parts about that. We see armor pop up as the game progresses that you can use dragon scales to create. And typically, how dragon scales are harvested, they're either stolen, taken from a dead dragon, or the dragon gifts them in order to make dragon scale armor and things like that, which have higher resistances to bump your AC, resistance to types of damage like fire or ice, or based on the dragon scale type, and a couple other resistances depending on which version of the game you're looking at. But the scales don't usually come off by themselves, which is kind of an interesting part. But like I said, we could talk forever just on the lore of dragons and what we're looking at for them. So I think as far as D&D goes, I think that blanket covering of what they are there is good. So I definitely want to turn it over to Cassie, who is the dragon queen, I'm going to say. So as far as
You
fantasy
saying that?
go, as far as yeah, as far as dragons go, I have to just bow to Cassie on this one. So Cassie, I'm turning it over to you.
It is rare that I feel like I might know more than Mike does about something ever. And I don't know if this is the case or not. But dragons are so fascinating to me. And I think it's partially because in so many cultures, practically every culture that we see in history, there is some form of dragon. And dating back to the Mesopotamian era, where we have cuneiform, which is the first form of writing we ever saw, and they talk about dragons. So it dates 4,000 years into our human history. It is global. And dragons appear a little bit differently and have a little bit of a different lore depending on where you are. So if you start with the Asian dragons, they don't have wings. They tend to be longer snake-like bodies with four legs, and they are highly regarded. So they're thought to be lucky and a sign of good fortune and things like that. So they also are not associated with fire as much as wind and air. So they do fly, but they fly using magic, not wings. And they're able to like push air around and move air around, as opposed to our European dragons that we talk about, I think, a little bit more here in the United States, which breathe fire. Then, so getting into the Greek era, the ancient Greeks called basically every monster a dragon, which was interesting. So there are things like chimera that they call a dragon, which we wouldn't typically associate in the same class. So that's, I think, where the speciation kind of came into play, where they were like, this is this type of dragon and this is that type of dragon. And that's when we start to see a little bit of a differentiation between dragons and wyvern and drakes and worms, WYRMS, which are all different types of dragons because there is so much lore about them. So into the medieval era is when they started to really get those dragon faces, wings, scales, forked or spaded tongue. We'll see on dragons in the medieval era. Some of them have like human-like tongues, but for the most part, they're reptilian, or they were associated, some people say they were associated with the Catholics coming in and chasing out the pagans, and the dragons are representation of the pagans. So there's a little bit of religion that gets mixed into dragon too, which I find fascinating. And then they start to evolve again, and we start to see them more in literature, and that's when they really expand and grow. One of my favorite book series by Tamara Pierce is the Tortall universe. There are dragons in that universe, and they're seen as highly intelligent. They're like bored by humans. They love talking about what is happening in the world, and there's a lot of communication, but not a lot of action. And they do use fire, but they use it as magic from their feet. So they're not like breathing fire. So that's one aspect of a dragon. And then when we get into more, I guess, more mainstream dragon is when we see that fire breathing, flapping. Sometimes they're super sentient and super intelligent, and sometimes they're just like another animal. Sometimes they're human-ish, and sometimes they're completely different. So there's lots of different ways that we can go with dragon lore here, which is what I find most fascinating. I'm super excited to see how we talk about ecology of something that is so broad and diverse.
Before we get into the science behind dragons, I feel like because there's such a presence in pop culture, especially in fantasy, obviously, I was just thinking, Cassie, as you were describing the different variations based on where you are in the world and in history, I was thinking about like obviously Drogon. One year Jake was Daenerys for Halloween and I was Drogon and it was awesome. But yeah, Game of Thrones, but then there's like
Smog.
yeah, of course.
And
What's
of course, Empyrean series with Fourth Wing now.
Yeah.
Dragon.
Aragorn, the Aragorn, right?
Aragon.
Aragon.
Yeah.
That one. I grew up on Dragonheart, where you had Sean Connery dinosaur. You had Reign of Fire was another big movie, right?
And book series.
And series, yes.
A what dragon?
How to Train Your Dragon. So they could be like big, scary, evil, and they can be like ugly.
That has a great soundtrack, by the way.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
I love that. Puff the Magic Dragon, guys.
Figment, Cassie.
Figment. I've got my Figment shirt on.
That's one Spark.
I grew up reading Dragonlance, so when you mentioned Fizzvan, and I was like, wait, Fizzvan, like I was trying to, because it's been so many years since I've read those books, but I feel like that is what segued dragons into, in so many ways, into Dungeons and Dragons in a major way. But it's cool, Cassie, like the lore, this is our first monster that Gelatinous Cube kind of just lives in Dungeons and Dragons, I think. But this dragons live in every culture. That's so cool to think about. Nice. Well, let's roll for our science facts then, and see where we end up. I got a nat 20, guys.
A nat 20.
All right, my rolls have been such garbage.
18.
I got a 19.
Oh, I'm last this time.
Wow.
So I'm gonna keep
really
raising.
high this time. You know a lot about dragons.
Yeah.
We've come a long way to be at this point. So with real world dragons, I mean, you can think about like Komodo dragons. It's literally in their name, right? I also thought about just some predators that are, in my mind, a little dragon-like from the perspective of other creatures, smaller creatures. So, for example, red-shouldered hawks, which to my chickens, that we have chickens that we keep, and unfortunately, just recently, like in the last few months, a red-shouldered hawk like came in and got one of our chickens, and then we put up all these wires to try and prevent it. But I was thinking, like, from the perspective of that chicken, this thing coming out of the sky with these talons, and even like the nests they make like up high in these trees and kind of with all this stuff. And I don't know, it's a little bit of a stretch, but probably the biggest thing I started thinking about, and sorry if I'm saying all the things you guys are going to talk about, but the bombardier beetle, you have to get into this insect that can, has two different compartments in its body that mix these compounds, and it can create like 200 degrees Fahrenheit of some sort of a liquid. Yeah, quite an evolutionary trait to get to be able to do that.
So warfare. I found it tough. There were so many rabbit holes to go down, especially because, like we said before, this isn't something we've never heard of. It's pretty mainstream at this point. So funneling into a specific direction with my neurodivergence was it was just a fun little challenge. But the place I started was, why do they appear in every culture? And I was thinking about the different adaptations that make them so fearsome, like fire, like they're snake-like, like the fact that they're aerial hunters, like the fact that they have teeth and claws and they're apex predators. Those are all things that people have been evolutionary built to fear. So it makes so much sense that they would pop up in all these different cultures when it's like the amalgamation of all these different things in one monster, which the Greek called every monster. So, but the place I spent the most time was on how they could fly, because pterosaurs are the biggest flying organisms in our history, and they had a wingspan of like 30 feet. And even albatross, I've seen albatross when I was in New Zealand, and they're gigantic. They have a wingspan of 9 feet, but they're still so little when they close their wings. So it got me thinking about how dragons would fly at all. And it got me thinking about, what's it called? Thermal vents or thermal. Okay, great. Thermal vents.
Thermals.
Thermals. Yeah. thinking about like gliders. When I was getting my pilot's license, we saw a lot of gliders at the airport we flew out of, which don't use any energy to go up. But it's pretty miraculous that a dragon would be able to fly at all because their wingspans are like 150 feet. That is just, I mean, literally 5 times as big as anything that's ever flown on our planet. So it got me questioning what the mechanisms were. Like, okay, they're warm-blooded. Would they have hollow bones? Also, what do you guys think they would need to be able to fly? I guess I didn't come up with an answer so much as many questions.
I am totally in the same boat, same plane as you. I was thinking about flight a lot, and there's so many questions there. And I know people typically will find like dinosaur fossils and be like, it's a dragon. But I'm in and half out. I want to believe that dragons did once exist on Earth.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if maybe they had a cartilaginous skeleton, because that wouldn't fossilize, except their teeth. And we find plenty of massive teeth that we just assume are shark teeth. But what if they're dragon teeth? So I was thinking about cartilaginous skeleton, so something very similar to a shark or a ray, like the bridge of your nose, it's flexible. Don't know if you'd be able to fly with cartilaginous because it is flexible. Like, would you be able to get enough lift? Would you be able to work with the resistance of the air in order to do that? But then also thinking about people and when they catch a fish and they're like, it was 12 feet. It was so big. And like, it wasn't. So also wondering if people are like, dragons are so big because their wings are so big. And then actually they're physically much smaller. And that is how they're able to fly, as their bodies are smaller, their wings are larger. Just thinking of like a bat, thinking of like a flying fox a little bit, how they're like pretty big as far as bats go. They're kind of the size of small cats. But their wingspan is absolutely massive. And that's so that they're able to fly. And also thinking about how bat wings are shaped, because we don't see anything in nature that has 4 legs and 2 wings. It doesn't exist. If like brush-footed butterflies, maybe you can make the case for it because their 2 other legs are like kind of tucked in and you don't really see them. But so maybe dragons are insects. But besides that,
Whoa.
I know, right? There's another rabbit hole to go down. But
You want everything to be insects.
getting back to that, everything is an insect.
Or molds.
Yeah. But getting back to bats, how bat wings are kind of like their arms also. So they have like their 2 legs and then they have their bat wings that are also arms, and they kind of fold down and they can use their little claws and things to, their little thumbs to move around.
What you're saying makes me think about like, you see some pictures of dragons and do you ever like be like, no, that dragon is too heavy. Like its body is too heavy. It takes me like, I know it's fantasy, but like kind of what you're saying there, like the length of the wings would have to be so massive and the body would have to be slimmed down to really manage flight, I feel like.
I've got this like little meme poster in my classroom that says, I really want to enjoy this film, but it's so scientifically inaccurate.
And actually, I think Game of Thrones is the worst with that. Like when you see Daenerys riding that dragon over King's Landing there, it's like that dragon looks so heavy and it's like, it's like knocking over buildings and things as it goes. And I'm like, possible.
And its flight is unfettered. Like it's running into buildings. And you're so right. It's so massive. He's a girthy guy and he's just like gliding no problem.
Super nimble and like.
So that's where the insect comes in, because we did say dragons have armor-ish bodies. And I know they're not technically supposed to shed, but like, is molting shedding? I don't know. Maybe it's an exoskeleton. And that makes them look big and beefy and heavy, but they're much lighter.
Okay.
Okay.
And that's also why we haven't found dragon bones.
Now I'm picturing a human holding a dragon perched on their arm, just like weighing nothing, even though it's huge.
How incredibly strong do you have to be to be like, this is fine?
Well, and speaking of strong, for a dragon to exist with, if let's say it's 150 foot wingspan, its chest muscles need to be so strong. Yeah. So which means that the body couldn't really be that small because it would need to be so strong to be that big.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And with that warm-blooded, they would have to be, it seems like warm-blooded to maintain that kind of energetic output. and therefore they wouldn't be able to just like sleep in the mountain for
Yeah.
100 years or whatever. They would have to be eating more regularly, I think.
Well, that was another question that came up was how much do they need to be eating? Because like think about those
Calorie
phalanges. They are
content, yeah.
cold.
Yeah.
Yeah. If they're 150 feet away or 75 feet away from where the blood is pumping,
Totally.
lots.
Yeah.
Mike, we haven't gotten to you yet. What do you got?
I hope you're all ready for this. I've got some great stuff in my pocket for this one. Okay. Yes, I really I just want to first address the limbs situation, right? Because we typically see like Game of Thrones does a great job where it's back legs, front legs, and they're walking around on their wings like a bat, right? Great. Traditionally, a lot of times when we think like high fantasy, it's a lot of times, right? Cassie, I don't know if you agree with me. We see 4 limbs, two wings, right?
Yeah. Because 2 limbs and 2 wings is a wyvern
Yeah.
or a drake, depending on which side the limbs are on.
But what if, because we know dragons are rare, right? Dragons are a rare species, a rare organism. What if they carry a genetic disorder?
I knew you were
A rare, yeah, you knew I was going this way. What if they carry a rare genetic disorder, right? And so it just passes on. We see that a lot now with California condors. There's few of them, and there's that because of inbreeding, there's few of them that they pass on rare genetic disorders, right? What if they have polymelia and they have genetically, they have extra limb, and we can see it as a genetic disorder. So just throwing that out there. And we do see also, I want to just like, okay, projectiles, because it's not just fire. We do see the acid breath and we see cold breath and lightning. So we have organisms out there like our electric eel that we know discharge a decent amount of voltage based on their body size. So if we're talking about a massive dragon, that's an incredible discharge, right? If we're looking at acid, we see the yellow crazy ants, right? The formics, right? Spitting formic acid, right? And then even in lizards, where we have the horned lizards shooting blood from the eyes, right? So that's a whole nother projectile thing. So we see it, but I am going to focus on what generally I think type of a species they are. I don't think bird. I could see because dinosaurs, right? Predatory dinosaurs, but they're not feathers, right? We could go insect, but we only see large scale insects on our planet for a brief history of time, right? Based on oxygen percentage in the atmosphere, right? We know they're warm blooded.
Oh my God, I so know. I'm gonna write it down.
Yeah, write it down. I really want to see if I'm gonna hit it. I am going to say they are a mammal. And why I'm going to say they're a mammal? Because they're a mammal, and there is one mammal on the planet that we see that has plates and scales that they do not shed and grow for the entirety of the life of the organism because it's compressed keratin and hair. And I'm going to say one of my favorite things on the planet, the pangolin. Because look, if you think about it, right, you have this plated animal, this long tail, it's intelligent, it burrows, so we know dragons create lairs, dens, so it burrows, it dens, it has its own, its own hideaway, right? They're rare, right? They're a plated animal, and it's hard plates too. We see it in different cultures that are using the skins of these animals as armor, right? And not really doing much to it at all. They're using the plates and using the plates as armor. It's a tough thing. They don't fall out. They don't shed. They don't peel their skin. And so they're highly prized in society, right? So I'm gonna throw out the penguin, the world's most trafficked animal, and what I always say looks like a nervous freshman trying to ask out a senior. Can I have a date, please? Yes. And so I'm gonna say the pangolin.
There it is.
Animal,
Oh.
Are they live birth too? Or
yeah, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like we don't see eggs in
There you go.
mammals,
Auto
right?
dreams,
So we do see it. And then also if we're talking venom and spitting venom, yeah, we have spitting cobras and things like that, but we have venomous mammals, right?
Mhm.
And venomous egg-laying mammals too, right? So our
Yeah,
like
platypus.
platypus right there, right?
They have
Or
like a
slow
venom
loris,
claw or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the
The
males. They
spur,
have
yeah.
a venomous spur on their back leg.
And then even the slow loris has venom glands as well. So
I love that you took literally the most fearsome monster that of which the game is named after and turned it and connected it to the most darling little
adorable
baby
thing in the
that rolls
planet.
around in a ball. Oh my
Yeah.
god.
But
So
if you could
great.
imagine a gigantic pangolin,
Terrifying.
yeah, and
Right.
those scales and plates, right? And
Roll attack
And
too.
that
Yeah.
long tongue.
For
with the, like, long
initiative,
tongue, yeah. I see what you
Roll
did
your.
there.
There are different species of pangolin, and they're found
Yeah.
on 2 different continents currently. So
I just went the route. I was like scales that don't shed, like that just don't fall off, and their skin doesn't shed all at once as in the dry. So I was like, I like the
but I
idea of pangolin.
Did anything come up for you all with the other behaviors of dragons? Like for me, hoarding, I was thinking about hoarding and the satin bowerbirds, which kind of like gather things around their nests, mainly for mating rituals and such. And I was thinking, like, why do dragons actually, like, what would be a real reason they would gather gold and all these treasures, right? Like, what do they use it for? Could it have a use, whether it's like mating kind of thing? Or I was even starting to think about like crocodilians, and how they make their nests and they use composting essentially to manage the temperature of the nest, to temperature dependent sex determination. And I was thinking, like, what if the gold is like some sort of thermo
whoa,
regulatory
it's a
engine?
conductor.
Yeah, maybe, right?
Whoa.
yeah, that makes total sense. I was
Yeah.
thinking more in a crow-like way of like, this is cool, but
Yeah, or penguins of like, I'm
yeah,
gonna give this to
I'm
my
gonna
mate.
give you.
This is nice looking.
I think in the lore they just like it. They're just
Yeah.
greedy and they like it, but I just wonder if you had to build in like what is their function, as biologists are known to do. We want to know like what is the evolutionary benefit of this thing.
Yeah, but why do they do it? Yeah, and so many times, even when we're writing biology books, we get things wrong because we don't understand until more research is done, which is why it's important to always do more research. But yeah, maybe we just didn't check the temperature of the horde before.
Wow, that really blew my mind. Just conducting.
Well,
Yeah.
and also I've always wondered, how did they get all that gold there? Like, do they go and like take it like in their hands? If
They
they're
hire a gelatinous cube, and the gelatinous cube doesn't break down that inorganic matter. And
I feel like dragons are like the original capitalists because they're like literally letting their money work for them.
they're symbolic for things other than what they are, right? Like I feel like in Game of Thrones, they are symbolic of weapons of mass destruction, right? This ultimate power. If you have a
Power.
dragon, you have a nuclear weapon, essentially, right? And I feel like they could be symbolic of like climate change. They could be symbolic of like any existential threat to the world that we perceive.
Well, if you think about their role in an ecosystem, I did think about climate change in terms of forest fires. They would be a keystone species by far, but fire is one of those reasons. But then like predator prey relationships, like managing populations, I feel like would be another reason. Aerating the soil probably with the way they land with their claws.
And
Do
ice
you just see-
dragons could be like mastodons where they tamp down the ice so that they
Yeah.
clean the carbon capture.
Yeah.
Is it would you see predominantly pine forest around things like red dragons? There you go, Cassie. So that's the reason why we have the pine barrens.
Oh, perfect. Because of red dragons.
Because of red dragons.
But didn't red dragons form in tandem with volcanoes or from like in volcanic regions?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was just a joke, and I'm just
Oh
not.
yeah. I was talking about like the
Thanks.
Serani and
Way to kill
the
the joke,
Reaper.
Rachel.
Yeah.
I was in science mode.
Are you all ready for the real world reveal?
So ready.
Yeah.
Can we do this? Okay. I feel like, as usual, I really all of your options. And I went with, so the kind of like obvious answer would have been like some sort of pteranodon, I feel like, or T-Rex or something like that. But of course, we have, what's the giant dinosaur in the Dungeons and Dragons? Like a
Oh, the Tarrasque.
Tarrasque.
Yeah,
Correct.
the world ender, the world enders, the Tarrasque. Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of feel like that's that domain, even though when I think of dragons, but I went with something that did overlap with humans briefly in our history, and it is Megalania or Varanus priscus.
The giant Komodo dragon.
Yeah, the giant, the one
it's-
from Australia. Yeah.
yeah, extinct from Australia 50,000 years ago. It's basically a giant Komodo dragon. I mean, looking at this rendering, this image, it doesn't look super dragon-esque. However, I want you to imagine, humans, because there were humans in Australia 50,000 years ago. There's sense that there was overlap with this giant lizard that could consume humans easily, right? And would have been a major predator. And humans were likely implicated in maybe hunting this species down, so it could have gone both ways. But I just think, as in terms of what for human history we actually overlapped with, that was the most dragon-esque in my mind. That's where I went with Megalania. I don't know if that's the way we pronounce it, Megalania.
Yeah,
If that's not a band name, I don't know what is. I'm sorry, Kathy.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense too. Because at least from what I know about Komodo dragons, I'm assuming this is a ancestor or similar species. They can swim, they can climb when they're little, they move incredibly quickly for what they look like. They can move in short bursts, and those teeth are terrifying. They have a forked tongue, and they tend to live in layers or kind of like a cave-ish area. So all of those things lend to the lore of the dragon that we know from D&D.
Yeah, and these were likely, they estimated that they could be 23 feet long. So this is really, really big and over
Yikes.
1,000 pounds. There's been like a debate about how big they were because it's like they're reconstructing based on vertebrae they find and stuff. And so there's different estimates. So there was a downgrade, and then someone was like, maybe they could have been that big. So there's sort of a debate on their exact size, but they're certainly the biggest Komodo dragon or monitor lizard species we've ever known about. So, yeah.
Wow.
Incredible.
I can't imagine seeing that in the wild.
Come out of the forest, see it. Nope. And go
Yeah. Alligators are terrifying, and they're like less than half of that size.
Most of them.
And I mentioned I almost went with dinosaurs, right? I do think, and I was looking up, is it possible that basically real fossils of dinosaurs are what have inspired, you kind of, I think, got at this a little bit, Cassie, like the myths of dragons, right? If you find a dinosaur bone or a skull and it was the 1600s or even like 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, these myths would emerge, right? And I learned that actually is what they think led to a lot of the thoughts about like giants, because if you found like a leg bone of some sort of dinosaur, you'd be like, oh, this belonged to a giant or whatever.
Well, if you think you're excavating large amounts of stone for castles, keeps, whatnot, or you're digging out trench or whatnot, and in a lot of these areas, you can find a lot of large fossils relatively close to the surface. So if you're excavating in a pit for a stone and you come across this, yeah, absolutely, I can see you being like, dragon.
Because, I mean, you don't know, so
Yeah.
you make it up. But there's
Finding
a lot of
those teeth, like just finding teeth alone, terrifying.
Yeah,
And
the size of your hand. Yeah.
And we find, I mean, you can go to a lot of places, in my area locally, and find megalodon of just like skimming the surface. Like, so you can find them along beaches in Florida. And so you just walking along a beach and picking this giant tooth up and being, oh man, where is it?
And at that time, I mean, the world, was not fully mapped. So who's to say they don't still exist, right? On some distant continent or something too. So yeah, you can see how people had a lot of fear and legends and
Yeah.
lore about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the type of fossils that people find in certain areas led to the different types of dragons that we know of today, where there's some areas that there's a lot of like crystalline that gets into the fossil, and then those dragons had like crystal-like scales because that's what they saw on the skulls that they're excavating and so little things like that make it really interesting to
That's
see
super
that
cool.
that's where they came from.
And yeah, that kind of makes me think again of like how in the D&D universe you get the chromatic versus metallic dragons based on different ecosystems.
Yeah.
And how, I mean, that's kind of like the fantasy adaptation of this real world history.
Yeah, for sure. We see that in plenty of species where they live in a different ecosystem and they look different or they have a different adaptation, but they're similar species or have a common ancestor, something like that.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Do we have any education or conservation connections to dragons?
Got a good one. So I'm gonna go back to my world of pangolins, and the rarity of the scales. And I think this just opens up for a great conservation type of conversation to have about trade, illegal wildlife trade, bringing up certain legislation, Lacey Act, et cetera, and ESA, CITES. Um,
What is the Lacey Act? And
Transporting animal product across across boundaries. It's a good preventative of the influx and movement of illegally obtained flora and fauna. Um, and so I think this kind of just brings into light a little bit of, hey, we have these rare animals, these rare species, or where we're trading, we're selling, and where I think that kind of is a nice blend of like we can pull fantasy and talking about the reality of it. And we really haven't talked much about wildlife trade and things like that during this and the selling of a lot of these species, which I think we honestly could bring that back in if we were, talking about owl bears and displacer beasts and things like that. We all know here that those things would probably be illegally traded or some aspect of them, right? If they are real animals. And I think a pangolin really kind of can branch that, or you're just the scales alone of these species and the rarity of them.
super cool.
Yeah, first of all, yes, completely. Any opportunity to talk about illegal pet trade and what's really happening in the world is a wonderful use of class time. I was thinking, based on this conversation and how different each of us thought a dragon compared to a real life organism, it could be really cool in like an evolution unit to challenge kids to create a dragon family tree and prove like why they evolved from certain real world organisms based on those adaptations to kind of blend fantasy and science, but rooted in I feel like this episode more than other episodes, we kind of like nailed down on specific organisms rather than, and here are 10 other organisms this could be like. So I feel like it's specific enough in, and kids are so aware of the idea of dragons, it could be a really cool project to get them to make
Yeah,
them
if they did
blend
like
science and
Harry
fantasy.
Potter dragons and dragons from different countries and like made like a
Yeah.
field guide
Yeah.
or classification scheme or something.
Yes. Thank you for translating my
The fantasy
half-baked
field
idea.
guide.
Was that there's a dinosaur that was named after Hogwarts guy Draco. I forget which one it is, but it was like a recently being like the last like decade or two, dinosaur that they named after some of the dragons in Harry Potter.
Wow.
Their scientific name. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines of like dichotomous key and the different types of dragons that you can come up with in culture and history. But speaking of culture and history, I think it's a great way to tie in an ELA unit with science. So talking about mythology and culture and understanding the ecology that goes on top of that and how that all works together to come up with ideas like dragons that perpetuate throughout many cultures, many generations, many worlds. So yeah, a great way to tie it all together. And of course, just I think everything we talk about here is kind of a go outside, explore, learn more. We talked about so many different species of animals that do weird things today. And I don't know that everybody's heard of a pangolin or a bombardier beetle or, a lot of the other things that we've talked about here. So yeah, go out and explore. That's the best way to start.
Yeah. Yeah, Cassie, as soon as you open the interdisciplinary door, we obviously need to talk more about it because I feel like when you're talking pet trade, when you're talking history, that's actually really hitting on social studies. So that could be a great entry point in a social studies classroom. ELA would be like the research communication of it. And I feel like you could quantify, you could bring math in with like
Body mass or like
Body mass,
yeah,
calculating how big they
that's
could be before their
physics
wings
is
are
right
too big.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
you got it, man. Kevin, what were you going to say before I talked interdisciplinary?
So, yeah, so in Jurassic Park, there's that scene where the kids, first Jurassic Park, the kids are like in the tree, they've been running from the dinosaurs, but the Jeep like falls down on the tree and they're like, they look up and this Jeep is like coming down, like breaking through the branches, and they have to like scurry down the tree. It's like this, it was a great moment because to me, it's symbolic of humans and technology, right? Like the threat of humans and like this whole time we're thinking about dinosaurs and that they were like almost too big for the world, too dangerous for the world, and now humans are too big for that. So this is getting like kind of philosophical stuff, but like I do think dragons are kind of, like I said before, metaphorical to this like threat of something that's so big and so dangerous and so powerful that it can destroy the world. And I just think like not to increase eco anxiety in kids, we don't want to like scare, but I do think that idea of like when have we gone too far as humans, right? Like what are we doing that is just too much with technology or with different things? And so anyway, that's not really a clean, neat lesson plan or a thought about the threats to the earth, both in fantasy and in real history of different species. So
I love that question. When have humans gone too far?
when have they, yeah, like, and when is our breath weapon overpowered, right? When, so to speak, right? Like
Yeah.
when are we just like our challenge rating is just too high for the earth at this
And
point?
what is that? How is that measured? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Cool. Let's talk about our science or fantasy thing for the week. And I had that nat 20, so we'll just go in the same order. But the big thing for me is I found a bumblebee nest.
Ooh.
I love bees. I'm a pollinator biologist is my background, but like I've always looked for bumblebee nests and it's hard to find them, but I just found one recently and I looked at it. You could see the honey pots that the queen has made, and she had 10 daughters, which are the workers, and they were all fanning the brood cells, and you could really see it. It was under this little piece of wood, and it just, I don't know, it made me so happy to see it in action. And I'm going to check on it again because I can kind of peek at it and see how it grows through the summer.
Oh, wow. We have a pergola that we've just been slowly giving to the carpenter bees. And last summer we were like fighting back by like trying to plug the holes. And then within a day it was like the hydra of holes. There would be 10 more holes. But I just love the idea that we have a bee hotel open to any bee. I mean, we're like planting pollinator gardens. Why should we plug up our pergola when bees have chosen this as their Anyway, that's awesome, Kevin. My fantasy thing this week is, I've been taking ASL, and my teacher, we meet virtually, and he started this week. He showed me the flashcard of words we'd gone over, and then I had to sign the word and then use it in a sentence. So a lot of them were like days of the week and times. And so I was just going through my schedule and signing what I was doing throughout the week. And I signed that I was doing Dungeons and Dragons, which, by the way, this is the sign for dragon. Amazing. And he didn't know anything about Dungeons and Dragons. So then I went down this rabbit hole of how there really isn't this wonderful fantasy game that we all know and love. By the way, this is the sign for game in the deaf community because there aren't examples of it. And it just got me like really thinking about representation and how much that matters. And I started watching this video of this deaf person who got really fired up about, he was like, I want to play Dungeons and Dragons. I want to have a DM, but it's already so hard to get a anyway, it really opened up my eyes about how many different cultures we have even in America, because my teacher is right here in Detroit. And that's my pitch, is let's bring Dungeons and Dragons to all different kinds of communities, which is exactly what we're doing with science and D&D. Okay, I'm done. Yikes.
Speaking of all different communities, I have a friend, Ben, who runs our sword school that I go to on the weekends, and he had a dream to learn how to be a mermaid, which is so great and also like not something you would expect. But for his birthday last week, we know mermaids, of course. So one of our mermaid friends got to teach him a mermaid lesson and give him a mermaid tail for his birthday, and he got to swim around as a mermaid in his pool, and it made him so happy. So combining the science and fantasy of, and exercise too, of like learning how to swim like a mermaid with a tail, and it is something that's real and you can do if that's something that interests you too. Find your local mermaid to teach you mermaid lessons. And if you happen to be in South Florida, let me know. I know a couple.
I
Uh,
love that.
And I guess for me, my current nerdy project, besides meeting, cosplaying, is my Boromir pen holder that I've got right here. It's where the pens go. So I'm currently working on detailing this. This was an idea that Cassie actually sent to me, and I found a 3D model for it, rendered it out, and now I'm currently doing the painting and shadowing for Boromir. So
Are
that's
the
my
is
current.
that how many arrows? So the pencil holders are the number of arrows he gets shot
It's
with?
different in different media source, but yeah, it's in the movie he's struck by three, and then Lurtz is about to strike him with a fourth before Aragorn is doesn't save him. Sorry, spoiler. But before Aragorn steps in and prevents the final kill shot, yeah. So he's struck with three in the chest, shoulder, abdomen, and then chest.
And those hold pencils instead of arrows. That is
Yeah.
very,
Yeah, dude,
very cool.
that's iconic. That's so cool.
Next level always.
Yeah.
Now you
Yeah.
need arrow-shaped pencils.
Well,
Wow.
y'all, we've done it again. We made it out of the dragon's lair without getting incinerated, ingested, or cuddled by a cute pangolin. I call that a successful session. Huge thanks to Mike, Rachel, and Cassie for bringing the science to the tabletop today. If you enjoyed this deep dive into fantasy ecology, don't forget to subscribe to the Ecological Bestiary on your favorite podcast app so you never miss a long rest with us. And go out there, look for the real world monsters in your own backyards because the real world is magic too. See you next time.